Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. I wanted to make this video because there's been a couple of explosive jumps in prices in Scarabs over the last few days, and I wanted to talk about some of the Scarabs that are still really underrated and really cheap. So yesterday, there was a video that was put out by Chronic Painless that advocated a strategy farming tier 16 maps, not 17, tier 16s, using Horned Scarabs of Bloodlines and also the Cartography Scarab of Risk. Now this strategy was really good at one narrow thing, and that was spending a lot of currency in order to generate a lot of gold. However, the Horned Scarab of Bloodlines exploded in price because this strategy was good and lots of people tried to emulate it. In fact, they're more expensive than it says here on this POE Ninja graph. This only goes up to 50 chaos, but I did sell 10 Horned Scarabs of Bloodlines into the hype for a total of 5 Divine Orbs. So that was more like 78 chaos at the time I sold. And who knows, maybe they've gone up further since then. Ultimately, one of the things you want to look for in PathOfExile is opportunities to use consumables that other people aren't using, and that's what this video is going to be looking at. I want to look at some of the Scarabs that I think are currently underrated, starting with the Domination Scarab of Apparitions. This is a Scarab that was thoroughly reworked in 3.25, and it adds 2 shrines to an area. In that way, it's very similar to the classic Domination Scarab. And the Domination Scarab of Apparitions works just fine as a budget alternative to one of your Domination Scarabs that you want to use on a map. The 2 shrines that you provided though will not be from the core pool of shrine mods. Instead, they'll be devoted to one of the 4 Elder Slayers each: Alhesman, Drox, Veritania, and Baran. I don't think there's any agency that you can have over which of the Elder Slayers it's devoted to, but really it doesn't matter all that much. This will function as a shrine and it will get the same benefits from your atlas that shrines will get. Most notably, it will get the benefit of an extra magic pack that you can add from your atlas. But when you tag this shrine, instead of providing you with one of the normal combat buffs, it will give you one that's dedicated to a particular Elder Slayer. This will add a little bit of damage to your character, but more noticeably, more interestingly, it will give you a period of time where any monster that you kill, the drops that they have that are not unique items will have a chance to be converted into Elder Slayer influenced items instead. These Elder Slayer influenced items are definitely worth your while keeping a lookout for. This is a Scarab that works very well in tier 16 and down just as a budget alternative to the regular Domination Scarab, and will also provide you with an additional bonus of sometimes giving you an Amethyst ring that's Elder Slayer aligned, or potentially just giving you a ring that's not an Amethyst ring. It might be a rubbish base like a Coral ring, but if it identifies to have Curse on Hit flammability, then that's something that can be used as a donor item for an Awakener Orb craft. So there's definitely some loot uses for it outside tier 17s. If you're running tier 17s though, you'll also get a number of item level 86 drops, which can be particularly juicy for Elder Slayer influence items. So there's a number of things that are going on with this Scarab. Basically though, it is worth using just as a budget alternative to the classic Domination Scarab. But on top of that, it has additional bonus uses as well, particularly if you happen to be in tier 17s. For that reason, Domination Scarab of Apparitions is getting my seal of approval at the moment as one of the best budget Scarabs in the game. While we're on the topic of Domination Scarabs and shrines, Domination Scarab of Evolution is really, really good. This is one of the new Scarabs that was added to the game. It replaces the old, probably a little bit broken Domination Scarab of Teachings, which was the massive XP boost. So Domination Scarab of Evolution is something that works in a fairly complex way. The first thing is, don't use this in content that you've got a high risk of dying in. If you do die with the shrine buff on you, you'll get basically nothing out of it. You can use up to 2 of these in a map, and they cost 3.4 chaos in large bulk at the time I'm recording this video, but of course we'll see where that goes from there. I wouldn't pay 10 chaos for this Scarab, but I probably would pay 6 or 7. What it will do is it adds an evolving shrine into the map. When you tag this shrine, you'll get the standard buff that will appear on your character that you'd get from a shrine normally, and it will extend with effects that increase shrine duration. This shrine does not work like a normal shrine. While you've got it active on you, whenever you kill a monster, it will have a chance to be reborn. The reborn version of the monster seems to be higher in rarity than the one that was killed. This will not upgrade a rare monster to a unique, but it seems like it goes normal to magic, magic to rare. It's not that common for these monsters to be reborn, but it definitely adds up to a lot if you are pushing forwards aggressively through the map and killing a lot of monsters as you go. These monsters will then drop new loot and they'll award new XP. This also is something that works very well in conjunction with Beyond. We'll talk a bit more about Beyond and the Endless Tide keystone in a sec when we talk about one of the other Scarabs we're going to be discussing, but it definitely has a lot of synergy there. Domination Scarab of Evolution is just a multiplier to the amount of loot and the amount of monsters that you kill and the amount of XP that you get for the next roughly 75 seconds. And as a result, it's something that's really good if you are clear speed focused and you're already pretty powerful. Also, being a pretty cheap scarab, it's something that you can do trial runs of in lower tier maps. So if you're concerned that you might end up dying without being able to get much value out of this, then you can just drop down to a lower tier map and just get a little bit of practice with how it feels in a tier 6 map, a tier 8 map, and then once you're confident that you can run it in a tier 16, then go and do it there. As for tier 17s, I feel like this probably adds a little bit too much danger in most cases, and I wouldn't suggest using this if you are up to tier 17s. Definitely try it out, but I don't think it's something that's going to give you fantastic results there. This is more for people who are not running 17s yet. Use Domination Scarab of Apparitions in 17s by all means. In fact, I think that's fantastic there, but this one, I don't think it's all that great. Next, I want to quickly talk about Cartography Scarab of Corruption. This is a scarab that doesn't fit into a video that's about budget-friendly scarabs. This is generally trading at about 20 chaos in modest bulk and about 24 chaos in large bulk, and so it's something that you definitely want to only use if you've got a coherent plan for maximizing it. But there is a budget alternative to Cartography Scarab of Corruption that does almost the same thing, just does it in a different way, and that does it for 1 chaos. The benefit of Cartography Scarab of Corruption is not that it adds anything to the map you're running right now. What it does is it makes the maps that drop inside that map far better than they would otherwise have been. Enter Delirium Scarab of Delusions, which does the same thing, just in a different way. Instead of forcing it to be Varled and to have 8 mods on it, it will instead force it to have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 layers of Delirium. This is at random, and it seems to be heavily biased towards 1, 2, 3. 4 and 5 is pretty rare. Additionally, getting a Scarab layer with the Delirium Scarab of Delusions seems extremely rare. I've only had 3 or 4 of them, and I've dropped more than 200 maps that have been augmented by Delirium Scarab of Delusions. Well over 200 of these maps, actually. Delirium Scarab of Delusions is simply a way of just adding more juice to your future maps at a cheaper price than Cartography Scarab of Corruption, potentially compatible with it, or potentially usable alone. The key benefit here is that it's so cheap. I was able to buy literally 500 of this Scarab for 3 Divine Orbs. It's something that if you go to the in-game trade market and put up a buy order for it, 1-to-1 against the Chaos Orb, it'll fill pretty quickly, although because it appears Delirium Scarab of Delusions is in the 3rd rarest category of Scarabs, it ends up taking quite a bit of gold in order to do this. It's going to cost you 125 gold for each Scarab you want to buy, and if you put up an order that doesn't fill and you end up cancelling it because you're getting impatient, you want your Chaos Orbs back, you're not going to get that gold back. One of the things I really like about Delirium Scarab of Delusions is there's a fair number of people who are currently at a point where tier 16 maps feel like they're a little bit too easy for them. Tier 17s are not something they're quite up to yet, and Delirium Scarab of Delusions will generate you a lot of content, 40%, 60%, 80% Delirious maps that are definitely in the middle of those 2 tiers. And then tier 17s tend to be somewhere harder than 80% Delirious 16s, but easier than 100% Delirious 16s in most of the time, at least assuming that you roll over the particularly heinous mods you can get. So that's Delirium Scarab of Delusions, one of my absolute favorites in this league, one of my absolute favorites in last league, and no matter how much I talk about it, it doesn't push the price of it up, so it's something I feel pretty confident to recommend here. Next, we need to talk about Endless Tide. This is going to be talking about a Beyond Scarab. In the background, I want to showcase some footage of me running a map involving this. Now, firstly, I want to showcase the fight against Calderis, the map boss. When Calderis falls over, 8 to 12 Beyond portals are going to spawn, and those are then going to coalesce into a couple of fights. Those fights are pretty straightforward, and not much drops from them. But that's only one unique monster. What if we were able to generate this sort of second wave on every single rare monster in the map and every single unique monster in the map? Well, that is the benefit of Beyond Scarab of the Invasion. This Scarab is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly strong. Rare and unique monsters slain in the area, and this will exclude rare monsters that are spawned through Beyond mechanics, they will generate 8 to 12 additional Beyond portals when they die. Now, the reason Endless Tide is so important is that Endless Tide has a text, Beyond portals in your map cannot spawn unique bosses. The unique bosses will spawn pretty quickly if you're running a heavy Beyond strategy on a map, and whilst that's good, you'll get a couple of tainted currencies off them, those Beyond bosses will then end the Beyond event in that map. And so it doesn't matter how many more portals you schedule to spawn with various Scarabs and the like, you won't get any more Beyond portals spawning. What Beyond Scarab of the Invasion will do, anytime you have a mechanic that spawns a lot of rare monsters, this can be Abyss as I'm using in the background, it can be Breach, it can be Blight, and I'm sure that you can find others. Probably Ultimatum would be really good with this as well, although that's going to be very, very dangerous. You're then going to have a huge amount of additional Beyond monsters that you can fight, and because it's an endless tide, not a limited tide as you would normally get with Beyond without that keystone, they're just going to keep on coming. This is a huge multiplier to the amount of monsters that you'll fight in the course of a map. These additional monsters will be fairly tough, and they're fairly stingy on the loot, the Beyond monsters, but when you've got this many of them, it ends up still working out really, really well. So that's Beyond Scarab of the Invasion. This is my pick for the single most underrated Scarab at the moment. It is actually pretty rare, but basically no one's hyping it up, no one's really using it, and so it's something that is extremely cheap to get in bulk. I was able to pick up 200 of them before I recorded this video for the sum of 220 chaos, and that was not by going for the cheapest person that was listing them. That was just picking someone that was about 20 notches down the list and going to them. So this is definitely something that is currently a very budget-friendly Scarab. The final point I want to make though is that there's a whole bunch of Scarabs I'm obviously not talking about in this video. This doesn't mean that those Scarabs are useless. It is the case that there are about 3 or 4 Scarabs that need to be used in highly optimized strategies, otherwise you will lose currency using them. For example, Horned Scarab of Glittering. Don't bother if you're not a magic finder. Ambush Scarab of Containment. Don't bother unless you're copying Fub Gun strategies. The people who are doing these strategies are bidding up the prices really high on them. Some of these are tier 17 strategies like Fub Gun's Ambush Scarab strategy. Some of them, on the other hand, are low tier strategies like the Essence Scarab of Calcification. The best way to use the Essence Scarab of Calcification is actually in lower tier maps rather than higher tier maps. But basically the top 15 or 20 different Scarabs that are listed here in this price order, these ones you shouldn't use unless you've got a coherent plan around them and you've done a fair bit of thought into the optimization. But all the rest of the Scarabs, you'll find that if you use them in conjunction with a fairly cohesive plan on your Atlas and a fairly cohesive plan around the type of character that you're playing, these Scarabs will all make you quite a lot of currency through the time that you're playing. Even if you don't make it on every single map, you'll find that these are all going to end up being fairly good value, and you should just feel free to experiment with them. The worst thing you can do is not use Scarabs because Reddit told you that all the Scarabs in the game are priced around tier 17 map use. They're not. There's a couple of them that are, but those are very few and far between. As for the rest, you should just use them, find out what works for you, and ultimately find out what Scarabs you think I've missed on this list of cool budget Scarabs. I'm going to leave it there. May your Volobs have interesting results, and may your maps use interesting Scarabs.